Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. I'm Tudor Dixon, and today we're talking about the junk we put into our bodies. And I know that some of you may want to check out talking about this because I also sometimes want to check out talking about this because I hate anyone telling me that I'm putting something bad in my bodies, or worse yet, my body or my children's bodies. Like the idea that someone tells me that I'm feeding them bad stuff, but on the other side of that, I want to know. And so I thought you might want to know too. And I've been following someone on Twitter who has been talking quite a bit about this from a perspective of understanding from a historical job. And so I said, I've got to have him on. I've got to talk to him. This is the co-founder of TrueMed, Calley Means. Calley, before I got you on here, I was telling you, I've been watching what you're saying. And like I said, as a mom, I have guilt over what I put in my kids' lunches, what we're eating at dinner, whether or not we're going out to dinner. And so you've really opened my eyes to certain things like sugar. And I think that we consume a ton of sugar. So I thank you for coming on the program. And I want you to just kind of give me a background of how you got into talking about this.
Thanks so much, Tudor, and just so grateful to be talking about this issue. It's been a long time coming on this for me, but I think it's the most important issue for America. I mean, what we're fueling our bodies with. I think how the system's rigged against us. It's the first order issue because it impacts our bodies and our brains, which impacts how we look at the world. But my story is I grew up in Washington, D.C., a good young conservative, worked for President Bush, worked for the Heritage Foundation, and really was on this kick about really appreciating and just implicitly trusting, all American industries, basically. I actually consulted for big food, consulted for pharma, and espoused how, American agricultural innovation, American pharmaceutical innovation was just, the best in the world. And I would say over the past 10 years, getting out of politics, more into entrepreneurship, inspired by some personal family health tragedies. My sister, who is a top of her class Stanford Med School surgeon and dropped out of the medical system after seeing a lot of corruption and problems, really was brought to this realization that with food particularly, we are not dealing with a free market. We are dealing with a rigged market. I think as a conservative, I think this idea of personal responsibility, personal accountability means a lot to me. But there's something very wrong where 80% of American adults are now obese or overweight. And if you want to talk about personal responsibility versus a rigged system, you just have to look at kids. And this is just a stat I can't get my head around. 25% of kids right now have prediabetes. A generation ago, you would have a diabetes doctor.
I did not know that.
Yeah, prediabetes. So 50% of American adults have prediabetes or diabetes, and 25% of kids, 15% of kids right now have fatty liver disease. This is a condition that, a doctor wouldn't see, among anyone that's not an elderly alcoholic. Now it's 15% of kids. And then, of course, 45% of kids right now, you go into any classroom. And I think this is why a lot of people waking up to this issue, and it's becoming a big issue, and that's resonating a lot, is parents are very concerned. There's something very off happening with when you look at close to 50% of kids being overweight or obese, and it's been a progression for me, but I don't think Americans, particularly parents with their children, are systematically trying to shorten their lives and miss their kids' weddings.
I think that's so important to talk about, because I've had some young people that have said, oh, these parents just don't care. And I think it's happened so fast. So I will say that growing up, I was in classrooms where we had, maybe one kid that suffered being overweight, but it was really pretty rare. And then I think it was shocking to me when my kids went into kindergarten, because I remember coming home and saying to my husband, so many of the kids are overweight. It was shocking to me because it seemed like there's something else going on here. And it seems like you've identified what's going on, those brands that we trust. And I think it's interesting. We're so used to big pharma. I haven't really thought about big food, but there is a lot that goes in behind the food companies being allowed to market to our kids, to put this in the lunchroom at school. Talk a little bit about how this is getting to our kids without really us realizing how bad it is.
Yeah. And I very rarely in my life look to Europe as a model of much, but I do think it's notable, right, that the US and New Zealand are the only countries in the world that allow pharmaceutical ads. And then almost every other developed country in the world does not, and has limits on food ads, which I really do consider sugar a highly addictive drug that we're pushing on children. We have rampant food ads. The number one advertiser for news networks in the country is pharma. The number one advertiser for children's networks, for Nickelodeon, the Disney Channel, is food. And you have heavy lobbying from Viacom, which owns Nickelodeon, and the other children's networks to the FTC to allow unfettered. It is shocking. And this is, I think, something people are waking up to that's very important to understand. There is a devil's bargain between food and pharma. What's happening, and this really, when you think about it, shouldn't be too surprising, but this is kind of a radical thought for the medical industry. Literally, you have leading doctors, the NIH, leading journalists saying it's confusing why there's epidemics of childhood obesity. It's actually not complicated. It's because of food. It's because sugar consumption, that's number one, has gone up 100x in 100 years. Parents, and I come at this with a new child. You might hear him in the background here. We've got a 1-year-old, and looking at the world he's going into, this decks are stacked against these kids, even for really well-meaning parents. It's 100 times more sugar than we ate 100 years ago. And I think criminally, what's happening is we subsidize that. From food stamps, which 15% of kids rely on for nutrition. The number one item bought is soda. 75% of food stamps funding goes to highly processed foods, sugar-laden foods. No other country does that. In some of the early tweets that got some attention, I worked for Coke trying to rig the system to make sure that food stamps continued paying for Coke. Again, it's the number one item purchased. 10% of all food SNAP funding goes to sugary drinks. I mean, this is criminal. We're actually funding metabolic dysfunction of our children, which is leading to trillions of dollars of downstream health impacts, not to mention the fact that 90% of grain subsidies and agriculture subsidies wholly go to grain, sugar, which turns into high fructose corn syrup, basically the ingredients of highly processed food, and only 0.4% of our agriculture subsidies go to fruits and vegetables. That's totally because of a rigged system. We give more as a government today.
I think it goes beyond even what you're saying, because my kids will watch YouTube and then they'll say, Mom, we have to go to Starbucks and we have to get this drink and it's filled with all of these syrups, and they will list off to me, right, there is very little actual drink in this. It is all sugar. And it's just pushed on them. And it's not so much that they want that. It's that it's exciting. Someone else is doing it. They want to be like this influencer that they've seen. They want to be like everybody else. And so food has become this way to be like everybody else. And you want to take a picture with it and you want to post it and you want to show your friends like what I got. Food has become an obsession.
Yeah. And I think the criminal element, it's one of the largest industries in the world. You have very, very smart people working at food companies. And I mean this very literally. Food has been weaponized, increasingly. And again, this shouldn't be too shocking, but it's worth knowing. Brain scans of kids on sugar, the dopamine areas of the brain, it is no different than illicit drugs. There's an addictive dopamine response. And I think throughout American history, throughout American medical history, just because something's been normalized does not mean we've completely lost our way. Of course, doctors used to smoke in the office in the 50s. Like this is, in my opinion, the biggest issue in the world, that we have gotten kids completely addicted through rampant marketing. And the fact that this is so available, they literally have a dopamine addiction starting at 1 or 2 years old when you look at kids' birthday parties. And then in a way, and this is kind of my point, in a way, this kind of makes sense from the food industry's perspective, right? The food industry wants to make food cheaper and more addictive. And the big unholy trinity of ingredients, just to lay that out, is added sugar, as we talked about. Added sugar, processed sugar, really is an invention of the past 120 years. Our body's not made to handle this. Additionally, the main source of American fats now, which are inflammatory and have addictive qualities, are called seed oils. Those were invented by John Rockefeller in the early 1900s as an industrial byproduct to oil production. It's the number one source of American fats now. It didn't exist in 120 years. And then processed grains. So highly processed grains actually were created after 1900, just in the past 120 years. The processing is taking the fiber off. For almost all of human history, it was whole grains. The whole grain is the fiber which blunts the glucose impact of the rest of the grain. Now the processing takes that fiber off. These are franken foods robbed of nutritional value that actually are hidden sugar and highly addictive too. So 75% of the American diet right now is ultra processed food, which basically those three ingredients are the core ingredients for added sugar, highly processed grains, and seed oils. If you look at any package, you'd be shocked at what American ingenuity can do with those ingredients, but they're addictive. So in a way,
so you can see as a mom, this is very intimidating for me because you're telling me things that I don't understand how to get away from it, to be honest. I'm hearing what you're saying, and it just makes me panic because I think I use that. I mean, my kids eat food dyes. My kids eat sugar. We're getting the thing that's easy to put in the lunch. I mean, they have fruits and vegetables every day too, but there's what else am I putting in there that I don't even know?
So I think there's some top-down solutions, but I think there is a bottoms-up revolution happening. I mean, from conservative media to independent media. The mainstream media, unfortunately, isn't talking about this because their number one advertiser is pharma, which we can get into, and food is a big one. But independent media, left, right, everyone's talking about this. Tucker Carlson, we're actually talking regularly, and he's doing regular segments on sugar, which I never would have expected, from everyone. Glenn Beck. So it's just like, it's so grateful you're talking about this. There's something resonating with audiences and with parents. And I think this is the trend we need to raise. And as far as what parents could do, this is how I would explain it. I think you've got to trust your own judgment first and foremost. I think this is where it gets to the devil's bargain, where we're getting sick because of food. But we have to understand one simple fact is that the medical system has been silent about this fact. We have to understand the medical system is not incentivized for us to be healthy. They're incentivized for patients to be sicker for longer periods of time, but not die. The 95% of costs in the medical system are driven by management of chronic conditions. And what happens when those 25% of kids who have prediabetes, 99% of people with prediabetes have at least one other comorbidity, one other chronic condition. 80% of people with diabetes have at least three. So when you have this metabolic dysfunction, obesity starting in childhood now, those are kids that are in the system, inevitably not learning how to eat better or move better, but just are going to be on, high blood pressure medications. Millions of kids are on statins now, metformin, SSRIs, inevitably 15% of kids are on ADD medication, which is highly related to all this. So it's not atypical when you go to a high school that most of the children there are on multiple treatment plans. These are all related to the same thing. They're all related to food, but we've segmented everything. So you're being funneled into a situation where there's complete actual silence, where, my sister who goes, to Stanford Med School and brings up a dietary intervention, when she's treating someone with a migraine, she's told, she's reprimanded. She's reprimanded and said by her attending surgeon at Stanford that she didn't go to dietary school, that talking about diet interventions and exercise, that's how doctors are trained, because they profit off, they wash their hands of why everyone's getting sick, and they treat you once you're sick. And I just real quick, when you get to kids, what we've also had is a shameful commingling of food and medicine. The Coca-Cola, I saw this when I was working for them, has donated millions of dollars to the American Academy of Pediatrics. The American Diabetes Association has accepted millions of dollars from Coke, and there's no statement about that. The American Diabetes Association several years ago recommended small cans of Coke as a good move for diabetics. So you've had a complete moral lapse where not only are the medical institutions silent on food being the issue, they're actually partnering. The majority of pediatric wards in the United States to this day have full strength sugar Coke vending machines, which is a huge, there's very little discussion of this because the system makes money when people are sick. And the message for parents is to understand this, and to question when the American Academy of Pediatrics is saying the first thing your kid should eat is processed grains.
I have a friend who calls it sick care instead of health care, because she says we shouldn't be calling it health care when it's not making you healthy. And I think this resonates with me. I'm a person who was diagnosed with breast cancer at 38, no cancer in my family, no history of breast cancer. And everybody kept saying sugar kept coming up, sugar. And I think, should I go back? I mean, if I went back, could I have avoided it? And what can I do to help my kids avoid it? But instead of any companies out there trying to help you to even I'll say, even when I had cancer, trying to find a diet that is for cancer patients, it's very challenging to find someone who even talk to you about how you should eat as a cancer patient. Cause they're like, no. Let's do the healthcare part of it and go to big pharma. And then this latest development where we have people that are taking Ozempic to lose weight. And this becomes, and I'm telling you, even people in my family have called and said, I'm going to get on this. And I say, this, you have to be on the rest of your life. Do you even know what the side effects are? Are you so desperate for that quick fix? And I think that is true. So many people are so willing that now they came out and said, they're going to do it to kids.
Yep. 12 years and up. Well, a couple of things here. And, thank you for sharing that story about your breast cancer, and cancer is a real reason I got into this. My mom was one of the 50% of Americans who dealt with prediabetes and had blood sugar dysregulation and insulin resistance. And she abruptly had a pain in her side in 2021. Went to the doctor, realized she had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and was perfectly healthy before, died 11 days later. And that's what really inspired my sister and I on this mission, because again, at Stanford Hospital, we were told by the head of oncology that this was unlucky. And I have a very simple message, and this should be shouted from the rooftops of every medical institution. Cancer isn't random to a large degree. The interconnectedness between breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, other leading forms of cancer, and metabolic dysfunction, which is tied to food. Inevitably, years before, if your doctor, really analyzed your fasting glucose and other biomarkers, there's warning signs to these things. And I will say, a large degree of breast cancer, and this is published widely. It's not talked about, but it's not controversial, is highly preventable. Cancer is a preventable condition to most degrees, but we spend 50 times more on curing it once somebody gets it than preventing it. It's like, forest fires.
But how do we get to the preventing? Because I first of all, I am so sorry about your mom. I lost my dad to pancreatic cancer in June. So I know. I mean, and that it's a death sentence the minute you hear. And the crazy thing is that my grandmother, his mother, died of pancreatic cancer, and they said no connection. And I will tell you that, interestingly, my grandmother had a total Coke obsession, a Coca-Cola obsession. She drank several Coca-Colas every single day. Yeah. And there was one doctor that said, I mean, it may have been related to the sugary drinks that she drank. But you're telling me right now, which I have to say, I think that there are probably so many cancer patients like me that are listening to you and saying, but how do I get there? Because I go every 6 months. They don't take my blood. They don't do any tests. They go, oh yeah, you look okay. Well, I looked okay when I had cancer. No one would have known by looking at me that I had cancer. So how do you get these pre-tests done? Where do you go?
Yeah, knowledge is power. So you've got to really understand your blood test. My sister and I are actually writing a book right now where we're really analyzing you go and you get the fasting insulin, you get the triglycerides, you get the HDL. Nobody understands what that actually means. These are like warning signs of your cells malfunctioning. And there's basically an algorithm where it's like, if you're over a certain level, they'll prescribe a statin, prescribe metformin. 40% of men over 40 are just boom, statin. Way before the recommended levels, there's signs of brewing metabolic dysfunction when your doctor will say, oh, you're normal. You've really got, and there's blogs on this, but you've got to be curious about your blood test. And then I'd highly recommend going, and you can go to the functional medicine doctor website, but like functional medicine doctors can do a whole host of many other tests and be much more knowledgeable to really giving you a picture of what these tests actually mean for the metabolic dysfunction brewing in your body. My sister read, who's now a metabolic health expert and a physician, read my test 2 years ago when the doctor said all my cholesterol levels were fine. And she actually explained to me how I'm imminently, at risk for metabolic dysfunction and will live a more painful, shorter life, and actually explained explained that to me, that was a big motivator for me. And I think people want to be healthy. My mentor and our investor in our company, Dr. Mark Hyman, who's written 14 New York Times bestselling books. He's been doing a lot of the media circuit on this recently. He's a hero. He has a new company called Function Health, just as a very tactical recommendation, Function Health, which basically brings this, boutique functional medicine experience tries to democratize that. It's very low price. You just go to a local blood place, and it does over 100 biomarkers and really gives you a very systematic. So I think knowledge is power. I do think biowearables are very important. We're early stage. But Tudor, in 20 states in the United States
what
today.
Is biowearables? What is that?
Biowearables are, we're the early stage with the Apple Watch and the sleep monitors. My sister started a company called Levels Health, which prescribes a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. So you can actually see what your glucose levels are as you're eating. I thought my oatmeal every morning was very healthy, but it was shooting me up to diabetic levels. I realized that if I slept for 6 hours, I'd actually have pre-diabetic levels of glucose, whereas I slept 8 hours, I'd manage it much better. You actually can arm yourself with more information. I think there's more and more of these things coming online. I think we're early, but I think over the next 10 years, we're actually going to have a real understanding of what's going on in our body. I was just going to say, in 20 US states to this day, patients don't even legally own their medical records. There is a systematic effort by the medical system to basically keep patients in the dark. And it's shameful because, we're being told to trust the science and trust the medical system when it's been a systematic failure. And just, we're going all over the place. But one point I just want to make for patients, because I think we're gaslighted a little bit. And this just gets into kind of how we should all think about it. I think this was me a while ago, right? It's like, well, the American medical system's, great. It's produced a lot of miracles. Life expectancy's gone up. I really would draw a differentiation. Any medical miracle we can think about was most likely started before 1960, and it's for an acute issue, something that would kill us imminently. An antibiotic for infection, emergency surgical procedures for like an appendix, complicated childbirth interventions, which are very important, things like that. We've actually shifted almost all medical to chronic conditions, which has been a disaster. The more statins we prescribe, the more heart disease goes up. The more metformin we prescribe, the more diabetes goes up. The more SSRIs we prescribe, the more, depression has been skyrocketing.
That I want to ask about, because I have folks in my family who are on SSRIs who have experienced that moment where if you skip a dose, you end up in a very dark place. And I think it's a lot of people who don't deal with this. They don't understand the impacts of this on your brain and how it can trick your mind. And I'm just wondering, as we see this violence, as we see some of these people that seem to break and do something that, shouldn't we have some knowledge of whether or not this goes back to big pharma?
Oh, a disordinant of there's huge correlations between violent folks and SSRIs. SSRIs are it's not controversial. They increase aggressive behavior. They increase suicidal ideation. So I'm not going to make a blanket statement about SSRIs categorically being wrong, but right now, 25% of women in the United States, adult women, are on an SSRI. It's the most prescribed drug in the country. It's a massive societal factor. And I would liken it, just to tie it a little bit, to Ozempic. These drugs that are lifetime treatments that don't actually cure the problem. Like, there's no study saying, once you go, as you said, it's actually problematic once you go off of these drugs. They're not curing anything. They're essentially numbing. And same with Ozempic, which now there's a full court press to prescribe to 80% of adults who are overweight or obese. It's a huge problem once you go off. I think we're almost dealing, and I think this Ozempic debate I've talked about, which really represents this dynamic with a lot of chronic disease cures, I think it's a spiritual reckoning that we have right now, where we are like fundamentally like disaggregated from our bodies. We are sleeping 3 hours less than we did 100 years ago. Sedentary behavior right now, 80% of 21-year-old males aren't eligible to join the military because of their fitness. We're putting kids in, sedentary environments. We're feeding ourselves absolute crap. I mean, that shouldn't be, but and then it's like these miracle cures, and none of the miracle cures have worked. With Ozempic specifically, it's a great case study because just taking the merits of the drug itself, there's heavy lobbying of the FDA. The FDA panel that actually recommended Ozempic is literally doctors that are paid by the maker of Ozempic. There's not conflict of interest laws, even for the panels that create the guidelines at the FDA or NIH guidelines. So you literally have conflicted doctors, obesity medicine doctors, who would profit greatly from having this lifetime treatment that they can give patients, right? And they created a test for this drug where it did not take into account what type of fat you were losing. It's now coming out that the majority of the fat being lost in Ozempic is actually muscle mass, where people are actually gaining fat. So Ozempic is actually causing people to lose weight. Dr. Attia is pointing this out. This is actually astounding. I mean, I actually think the drug's going to be recalled, but literally people are losing weight but getting fatter. That is what the data is showing, because muscle mass is being decimated by Ozempic. And not to get too in the weeds here, but we talk about metabolic dysfunction, diabetes, which 50% of American pre-diabetic. Muscles are the glucose sponge. Like if your muscle contracts, you're absolutely more prone to metabolic dysfunction. And that's the problem with all these hacks, right? Like almost like spiritually in America, lunging for these hacks and not have and frankly falling for a rigged debate where we have TikTok influencers paid by food companies saying it's racist to talk about someone's weight. We're being kind of rigged here. Like we got to get, just as a society, culturally, we've got to get back to basics where we're thinking about a child, thinking about their body, thinking about their brain, and asking the basics that grandma knew about, asking about how we can encourage good sleep habits, encourage them to eat better, encourage them to move. It's like, if we don't shift the $4 trillion of healthcare from a sick care system to that, and it's not this fluffy preventative thing. Like exercising and eating correctly is also the best way to reverse. Once you have a condition, you can reverse diabetes.
So you can reverse it.
Yeah, yes, you can absolutely reverse diabetes from food interventions. There's groundbreaking research. We've talked about cancer, how it's not random. Alzheimer's is now called type 3 diabetes.
I saw that. That was shocking to me.
And you won't have an Alzheimer's doctor just as the cancer doctors. They're not going to explain this to you. But this is astounding research coming out. And, there's protocols now to actually, dietary interventions and fitness interventions that actually have been shown to reverse dementia, which nobody thought was possible. So again, that's not profitable. I think the last thing I just mentioned, a lot of my friends in their 30s, 40s are facing autoimmune conditions, which are skyrocketing, like Crohn's disease and things like that.
Yes.
The standard of care for that is when you have an autoimmune condition, come into the office, every week, every 2 weeks, the rest of your life to get a injection. People can transform their lives through dietary interventions. I've had friends with Crohn's disease who completely ignored the medical system, really researched, went down the rabbit hole on books, and they said they'd never felt that in their lives. But they have to do
it. It's so hard. It's so hard if you have to do it. I mean, I'm not making excuses, but I think that we are a society that wants that quick fix. And then once they get you, I mean, you're talking about this weekly visit. It's the same with any type of anxiety, depression medication. Right. And I'm not saying that those are not helpful, but I think it's pushed so heavily that in certain cases, like in our system, you have to see the psychologist every week or every 2 weeks. And then the psychiatrist is simply a prescriber. Right. They don't talk to you. You see them once a month.
Great for them.
So now so it's like at least 3 appointments every month that you have definitely scheduled once you're on a medication.
Oh, and Ozempic now, you're going to have to see the obesity doctor, to get the re-prescriptions. It's a beautiful system for the system. Here's what I'd say for the audience is I think there's been this cynicism about the American patient that we've almost bought, that kind of people are lazy. People kind of want, I don't think people have gotten systematically lazier in the past 40 years with all these chronic conditions. So I think, getting back to I think it does start with our mindset, and we have not we don't have systematically a death wish as a country. We haven't gotten lazier. I think Americans actually do want to be healthy. So, I'll just give a quick story. My mom, when she had terminal cancer, we were, pushed into a bunch of interventions that would have kept her in the COVID where we wouldn't be able to see her. We had, thankfully, my sister, who's new oncologist at Stanford, who cried to her about being pushed into doing surgeries that weren't necessary. This is rampant throughout hospitals. I think doctors actually do know that something's very wrong. They got in for the right reasons, but patients aren't getting better. But thankfully, with my mom, we had the wherewithal to say no. We're going to go against the oncologist's advice. With our pediatrician now, who's saying literally they're giving us American Academy of Pediatrics dietary recommendations that basically recommend processed food. I'm saying no to that. I actually think realizing that when it comes to chronic conditions, preventing specifically, the medical system should not get the benefit of the doubt. Everyone comes on these shows and say, well, we'll consult your doctor. If you're trying to prevent diabetes, reverse obesity, heart disease, thinking about your children and their chronic conditions, you have to take things into your own hands. So that's the bottoms up revolution. I am somewhat optimistic. A lot of people are, wearing the wearables. A lot of people are listening, everyone from you to Joe Rogan, to health podcasts, to the leading books in the country. Now we're talking about this issue. So I do think there's an appetite for people to wake up. What we have to eventually do, and I am meeting with a number of members of Congress, and there does seem to be a lot of appetite for this, where the rubber hits the road at a top-down perspective is that we have to shift the incentives of healthcare to stop being incentivized for people to be sick. That is the problem. I think whenever you hear politicians talking about slightly reforming like Medicare Part D or this or that, we do need some radical rethinking, because every single institution, pharma companies, insurance companies are actually incentivized for costs to go up, hospitals, medical schools, everyone wins when more patients are sick, which is exactly what is happening. Healthcare is the largest and the fastest growing industry in the United States, producing worse outcomes. It's going to bankrupt our country. Why I'm optimistic is because there's a bottoms up revolution, which we're talking about right now. And mathematically, this can't go on. We are going to become, a fat, depressed, infertile, we're increasingly getting infertile, and sick population, with healthcare costs literally bankrupting. As an economic and fiscal conservatives, we spend multiples more to care for diabetes than the Defense Department. What's bankrupting our country, what's bankrupting the country, it's not even close. The preventable metabolic dysfunction tied to food, that is it. That is why the American experiment is going to fail. So I actually think it almost, and the only way is to say, how do we incentivize institutions of health to be healthy? And then it has to get to, and again, I thought this would sound fluffy years ago, but I really do think this has to be the answer. It's kind of self-evident. We have to think about our food system. We have to think about how do we create a food system, getting to what parents should feed their kids. Think about what humans have evolutionarily been designed to eat for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. It's whole food. It's not complicated.
I think just talking to you though, a week ago, I went out to lunch with a girlfriend and she said, I've got this glucose monitor, and I had never, maybe I'm living in a cave. I don't know. I'd never heard of this before. People that don't have diabetes wearing this to see what is triggering. And she said, I'm at risk. She'd done this. She said, I'm at risk for this and this. Mm-hmm. And so I had this, she said, I had it a couple years ago, and then I stopped during COVID. And she said, I went to my doctor and I asked them for one of these wearables, and they said, well, you don't have diabetes. We're not, no way. And they refused to give her one. So she had to find a different kind of doctor. What you were talking about, what did you call this?
Yeah. So my sister had the same experience. Basically our glucose levels are the Rosetta Stone. Like truly, if you see those a little bit out of whack, you can take preemptive action to dramatically lower your chance of getting breast cancer and other metabolic conditions down the road. So my sister, left the medical system, started a company called Levels Health. So Levels Health has prescribed hundreds of thousands of glucose monitors through a telehealth process. it is absolutely like criminal that most doctors will say, well, you don't need this. Let's think about just what that statement. It's like, you're not diabetic. There's no medical meaning to diabetes. It's that's an arbitrary number along glucose. So you say it's not reversible. There's nothing that happens physiologically when you get to the glucose, blood glucose level of diabetes. It's just arbitrary. We're all on a spectrum of blood sugar dysregulation. If you took anyone's blood, right, 93% of Americans would have one biomarker in their blood of metabolic dysregulation right now. We're systematically metabolically dysfunctional because of food, which is the root of almost every disease. It's the root of 8 of the 10 leading killers of Americans. So having a closed loop and actually understanding that, you might learn that you actually have some slightly elevated just standing glucose levels. You also might learn, as I did, that specific foods and actions impact your glucose. These are literally, like, from a top-down human competitiveness public policy standpoint, everyone should be prescribed a CGM and being encouraged to understand. So anyway, that's what my sister's company, Levels Health, is solving. And I'd highly encourage you could just go on Levels Health and get a CGM right away. And there's a lot of great content. She's Dr. Calley Means. She's speaking out about this. My company, I think another way to solve it is, and what I talked about, we've got to shift money from drugs to food. What I found is that you can actually use tax advantage medical spending, HSA, FSA. You can actually buy food just as you would buy a drug with tax advantage money. Yeah. So according to the IRS, even though pharma, working for them and seeing this, that they spend 5 times more on lobbying than the oil industry. They've rigged every health law, but they can't write in the law that a medical expense is a manufactured pill created by Pfizer. The definition of medicine is something a doctor says is useful in preventing or reversing a condition. And that can be food. And if a doctor substantiates in the note that eating a certain dietary meal, and it gets to your point, I think a lot of Americans just want to know what to do. If a doctor actually writes that in a note, and how that could be useful to preventing, pre-diabetes, if that's what your CGM is showing, then you can actually buy food tax-free with your HSA, FSA accounts, which I think is a good policy instrument. You can buy your gym membership. And what we're doing, and why I'm kind of on the warpath on this, is that I will put a food intervention and regular exercise up against a statin, metformin, even an SSRI. 150 minutes of exercise a week for 3 months is clinically proven to lower depression more effectively with less side effects than the leading SSRI. Nobody knows that. Nobody's told that. So we're writing that in notes through a telehealth process too, and enabling folks to, if they're qualified, to purchase food, exercise supplements, things like that, tax-free, pre-income tax, which starts leveling the playing field of this rigged system where the ingredients of a Coca-Cola, are so subsidized that a Coke at a store is less expensive than a water because there's so much subsidized ingredients from a rigged system. We're trying to level that playing field.
Wow. This has been fascinating. I am so glad that you agreed to come on and talk on the podcast today because I learned so much. And I know that people listening will go to TrueMed, they'll go to Levels Health. We're going to check it out because it is so important. It really is. I mean, as we see everybody in our families getting sick, because it's true. Everybody has somebody that they've seen go through this. And I think it really has awakened us to say, what can we do to change? And you are offering that. When you write the book, you got to come back.
Oh, we'd love to. We'd love to. And I'm so grateful again that we're talking about, and it's my journey as a parent. I think we're all making mistakes, but just learning. I think that's what's great about life. And just the one other thing I'd close with, I'm very excited about our book, but if people are interested in this, it's just being curious. I think Dr. Mark Hyman, going through some of his books, Dr. Robert Lustig. I mean, I've talked to so many people just kind of going down the rabbit hole. To me, it's a key to happiness is just learning about this stuff and learning about your body and being curious about what your kids are eating. And I just grateful to talk about it.
Well, you made me curious because I saw your post on Twitter. So how can other people follow you on Twitter?
Yeah, so Calley Means on Twitter, and it's never been the biggest Twitter fan, but I'll tell you, the past 6 months has been really fulfilling. Actually, just literally probably 1,000 or more parents. I think parents, or even people that aren't parents, but I think there's really people that are concerned about future generations, their parents' health, their health. It's been amazing. So I'm trying to expose this stuff and share what I've learned. So Calley Means, and then my company's truemed.com. And yeah, not trying to pitch my thing too much, but it is the result of really thinking deeply about this and trying to change incentives and enable people to save on healthy food. So truemed.com, we're launching soon. And yeah, those are the two big ones.
Well, thank you, Calley Means. You've been wonderful. You allow us to be vulnerable about this. And I think that's why so many people are drawn to what you're doing. And you can hear the passion in your voice.
Thank you.
I am so grateful to you because honestly, it's something that I didn't know how to talk about. I mean, it really has been, it's one of those things where you can physically see kids in the classroom. You can see your own kids changing in shape and size and say to yourself, what am I doing? And so this was very important to me.
Thank you, Tudor.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon podcast. For this episode, as always, or others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com and you can subscribe right there. Make sure you join us for the next podcast. Have a great day.